I'm interested here in how we train translators for a future marked by automation. And my basic question is, are we at the singularity, this hypothetical point where the growth in computer capacity, in compute, in the technical terms, which increases exponentially, it doubles every 2 years or so, will or has surpassed the processing capacity of the human brain. And by some estimates, we're there already. For example, in chess, Big Blue from IBM can beat a human, therefore we've reached singularity in chess. Has that happened in translation? Now, some people might say, yes, that happened with neural machine translation, and there were claims coming from Microsoft and Google that indeed parity with human translation had been reached. But perhaps some more, and I think those are very biased and limited studies. I won't go into that any further. But what we can't ignore is the fact that, according to calculations like this, less than 1%, much less than 1% of the words translated in the world are being translated by professional translators, by the kinds of people that we might train. And the world's working pretty well with that for the purposes that they're concerned with. And I think our training has to address that and therefore use machine translation in all language learning. But my topic here is a bit different. I'm talking about training translators here, not just all language learning. With neural machine translation, we already had these competing memes, the Austin Powers meme, like danger. If you like danger, go and use it and see what happens. And then the CEO of Google saying, "Hey guys, we've done it. We've is it danger or is it optimism? The future is bright. On we go." The latest avatar of that is clearly ChatGPT or GPT technology, which is very recent and has spawned 1,000 instant experts like myself, perhaps, since it was released to the public in November last year. And GPT-4 is even more recent, as you can see there. Is this like flavor of the month type stuff? Is it like Pokemon Go and we'll all be doing this and talking about it for a while? Or is it a very profound change, the next avatar? Is it singularity? Has this marked the point where the human element is no longer needed, has been surpassed by the technology? Okay. Again, we have the same memes recurring for GPT. One newspaper can picture it as the robot, the technology that replaces the human entirely, but a rival newspaper could have a more comforting meme, perhaps, that the human and the technology will be working together. So, which of those is it to be? Without deciding beforehand, I know part of us, translator trainers will say, no, don't go to the technology. It'll make mistakes. We need 100% accurate translations. Danger, danger, danger. Don't go there. And the other part will say, well, we can work with it. And this is the future. We have to find creative ways to work with it. Before jumping one side or the other publicly, I suggest an empirical attitude is what's required. What does that mean? Well, you find out first what the technology can do in its current state, and then we could perhaps look ahead and think where it's going. Then place that not within a direct comparison with human translators or student translators. No, place it in the history of automation on the level of centuries and just see what it is with regard to the previous avatars of automation, where it might be going, and what consequences that has for employment of language professionals. And then I want to think just briefly at the end here about the consequences for training. Now, I'm not addressing these other very interesting questions they are for another day, I'm afraid. Okay. Now, to make this entertaining for you, I asked GPT to translate a recipe for gazpacho, which is cold Spanish soup, as you might know. And there's the first sentence of it. It has some traps, like roughly, could be approximately. And the last verb there, chop, classic problem, incompletion of the syntactic structure. What are you going to chop? The previous noun is chop the spoon. Or do you chop the seeds? Or do you go back 1, 2, 3 and chop the cucumber? All right, so we're giving a classic test. Rule-based machine translation right back in the day would have floundered terribly here. That GPT translation is pretty good. For the Spanish and the Catalan here, though, it translates literally the syntactic structure, the verb form of the English, and does not adapt to the imperative or the second person plural, imperative in the Spanish and the second person plural in Catalan. So it's translating literally what's in the English text, but not adapting to the format or the genre-specific rules of the other languages. Russian, we have doubts about the collocation of that verb, and Chinese, it seemed to suggest that you would use the spoon for chopping, okay? And we did a test for Armenian, and it was just complete rubbish. So beware, we're talking about languages that have big publicly available databases. Armenian is not one of them, nor are the vast majority of the more than 7,000 languages in the world. So we're speaking about a pretty elite set of languages here. Now, if we change the prompt, and this is where most of us have got to, we're aware if you change the prompt, you get different results. We find that if we ask it to translate, giving the format for a Spanish recipe, the format for a Catalan recipe, that has been corrected. So don't rush to judgment, play with the prompts, and you can avoid some of the otherwise pretty obvious translation mistakes and produce something that's fairly acceptable. We did this. We're operating on the level of text. We actually have texts in 4 different genres, selected for different reasons. Here I'm just staying with the recipe one because it tends to illustrate what I want to illustrate. And you can see that we have the ST, the straight track with the prompt translate. So this is the translation concept embedded into the technology and its interpretation of the verb translate. Then modification of the prompt, where you can see many of the mistakes have been corrected, compared with Google Translate and with DeepL. What you generally find from that analysis is that no, it's not a big advance on the established publicly available neural machine translation systems. For translation, this is not yet a huge leap forward, okay? And nothing to panic about there on that level. And we can do the same here for Catalan, similar sort of patterns. We don't have DeepL for Catalan, unfortunately, and in Russian, okay? Now, our sort of results there, just saying, you know what, for translation, it's not doing better than the established neural systems. Are paralleled in this study, which has come out quite recently. It's using blur scores, which we don't particularly like for many different reasons. It's using isolated sentences, which we don't like either. We're much happier doing a more qualitative kind of assessment on whole texts. But they hasten to point out that even the GPT-4, which improves on the previous GPT-3, is giving scores that are lower than the established neural systems. This study was done by researchers at Tencent, which is the Chinese company. So they're very happy to show us results where they win on the translation into Chinese. We'll let them have that. We don't know how they select the sentences, but okay. So yeah, general finding is that as far as translation goes, it's not singularity yet. Yeah, we're not there. As long as there are those red bits or the orange bits, sort of where there are doubts and one could do something better, then a human is needed somewhere in the process. Now, this is an example that my colleague Yu Hao picked up from class. All right, it's from the biography of a former Australian Prime Minister, a great man, I might add, Gough Whitlam, and we gave it in class as an example, translate for a 12-year-old, and Yu was very impressed that one of the students came up and said, he moved to Canberra when he was 12 years old. So to adapt this for that particular reader, the student had put in when he was 12 years old. We thought, well, the GPT, it'll never get that one. It'll never think that way or that degree of adaptation. So we put it in, and lo and behold, what it does here in French, but the same in Chinese and Spanish, if you say translate for a 12-year-old reader, even more if you put the instruction at the beginning, okay, at the beginning of the prompt, it will pick it up and say, as it does in French thing, for a 12-year-old reader. So it can do quite classy things in adapting a text for the new reader. And in other versions into Spanish for the 12-year-old, it put in his first name, which is not given in the ST. It from its knowledge base told us he was called Gough and then used his second name there. Now, what's interesting is that when you get into this kind of text adaptation, some things occur. You get this great thing when he was 12 years old, which is there in okay. What we did here, was repeat it. Okay, we gave the same command once, twice, and then 3 times. And the third time, we've lost the fact that he was 12 years old. Okay, a lot of variation. Avec son papa is more like Kitty's language than avec son père. And son papa is up here. But notice that as soon as the text starts elaborating and adding information, making it more attractive as a text, it takes the risks of factual inaccuracy. Now, Kew, as it happens, is a suburb of Melbourne. It is not a town. It's not une ville. In itself, I should know I've been living there for 6 years. Okay, and as soon as you start to make the changes, une ville près de Melbourne, a town next or near Melbourne, no, is factually incorrect. And then une ville de Melbourne doesn't make very much sense. It's a suburb. The other dans la ville de Melbourne is quite correct here. Okay, so you've got a tool that can adapt a text very well, can bring in additional material and use explicitation if you like, but like all explicitation, runs risks of factual inaccuracy. So what you win on the swings, you might lose on the roundabouts here. It's a trade-off type operation when we go into this technology. That means, again, that you would need a human element in the work process in order to pick up places where those risks have been taken unsuccessfully. I just point out that the ideal here for measuring success in a translation for us in the group that's doing this is not particularly something like the Blur score or a comparison with the definitive human translation. We are far more interested in reader response. This is just an example from the ongoing work of Ke Hu, who gets readers to mark in green what they like and in red or pink what they don't like, and can map a translation and see how successful it is phrase by phrase. And what you've got at the top there is raw machine translation, and down the bottom here, you've got a post-editing of that raw machine translation. You can see, for example, that the post-editor has put in some very successful stuff in the dark green here, but at the same time got rid of what was pretty successful stuff in the machine translation there. and has got rid of most of the red. Okay. And this way, we do have numbers for this, but it also enables a pretty holistic qualitative evaluation of how well a translation is functioning in the space of reception. That's not my focus here. I just thought I would mention that in case you're thinking, well, how do you judge success in a translation? That's how we would like to judge it, and that's the direction we're going in. So, what is GPT doing from this simple exercise? That translate, there's a translation concept that is relatively literalist in the technology. On that level, if you're just talking about just translate, then it's comparable to NMT. It's not a big advance, and in some cases, it's a little worse. It depends on the language, depends on the text type, many other things. Prompts become important, and it's not surprising to see high-paying jobs coming out for prompt engineer and people who can work on that level, okay, of how to teach machines to interpret and realize the prompts. Or we have to teach our students now how to write prompts correctly, and there are courses popping up already, how to write prompts for GPT. This is what we know about new technologies. They modify the existing skill sets that we have and produce the need for new skill sets. This is among the most tentative conclusions. Bear in mind that by far most of the material on the web is in English, and then these other languages, which is quite surprising to have Russian up there. However, it's only working for text, for translation tasks that have languages that have extensive electronic resources, and that excludes most of the languages in the world. Now, positive use, it's great for adapting or revising. Okay, if you want a text adapted to a specific reader, you would use this at least to get ideas about how to use the adaptation. And it's also good for cleaning up a text. If you've got your translation finished, a human translation, and you ask it to revise it, it will pick up syntactic infelicities and give you a text that can sound better and is easier to read. It's also great for writing text. If you're sick of your clients sending you rubbish English, why not suggest that they put the text through GPT first and do a linguistic revision automatically before sending you the text to translate? It will make your life a lot easier. But it's not going to replace today that translation process. Okay, the thing that is translation in the more restricted sense, non-adaptation sense of it. Okay, it's great for looking for solutions when you're stuck. We've got to teach people to do that. And I suggest it's not great for using it raw for high stakes text where there's something important, where one error can have disastrous consequences. I suppose that's the case of gazpacho. If you say chop the seeds, and somebody chops the seeds, well, the soup is pretty, well, I don't know, it could be a new experiment, how to make gazpacho. Hey, let's use automation in creative ways. But otherwise, no, you'd have to be pretty stupid to start chopping the seeds, let's face it. Okay. Now, is this new? Firstly, automation of language has a very long history. Automation, the alphabet is your first automation of language. Writing is your first automation of alphabet for writing. Okay, dictionaries are the automation of language. Use of grammar, language on language. These things can be traced back a long way, and it's not helpful to say, oh, suddenly we've got these tools that can do these things, all right? And we've had them around for quite a while. And I want to suggest that they're all doing two things. One is recycling text. What is said in one situation can be said in another. And this is the foundation principle of certainly dictionaries, who give you the usage of a word to be used in all these similar situations. Okay. Translation memories, obviously, this is how you translated it there. This is how you might want to translate it now in a different situation. in the bytext that are fed into the databases of machine translation systems. And the fact that this works, I mean, it shouldn't work because we know from pragmatics that each utterance gains meaning from its relation with the context, with the situation in which it's uttered. We know that, but in fact, it's close enough for most purposes and it can be useful. And hey, we're not going to forego the dictionary because of what pragmatics tells us. Why? Because you have to learn about that usage, the accumulated usage of the tribe speaking the language. So just recycling text gives us not only these technologies, but also things like online legal forms. You know, you want your contract, go to the website, put in the data, the things that change, what language do you want it in, print it out. There's no earthly reason why professional translators should be paid big money for translating text that can be done very easily online in that way. CV, I have a university where all my CV elements are in a database, and I can print that out in any one of 3 languages in the format needed for the particular purposes that the CV has to be presented for. Okay, and that just makes sense. That's a way of recycling text. It's nothing particularly new, and it's going to get better and better. Okay. The other thing that technologies are doing is predicting text, predicting what is coming next, okay, and what's going to be useful in this particular situation. So you can see this when you're on your phone. I'm not very good at typing text on phone, but I'm intrigued that it will pop up the suggestion of the next word I'm going to write. I think that's really good because I'm so bad at typing. Oh, yeah, I can see this pop-up thing. And it's getting very clever at predicting what I'm going to say. Search engine optimization is getting pretty good at predicting what people are searching for and how to prepare the website so that it comes up high in the hit list of searches on the web. And it's something else that is happening in GPT. GPT is not just recycling text, which is the essence of translation memories and machine translation. Predicting text, predicting what's going to work in a particular situation, taking risks while it's doing it, I might add, is something that we're finding in the GPT technology that is not in the neural machine translation, or not to the same extent. Okay, so recycling has been happening forever. The predictive part really comes in with deep learning. Deep learning is in neural machine translation, but it's been pushed to a new level in GPT. What has to be stressed, though, is that our normal use of everyday language is always using phrases that we've heard used in other situations. This is how you learn a language. This is how you use it. Okay. And it is always predicting. If you're in a conversation, you're constantly predicting what's going to come next and reacting to it. And that prediction is a part of the way we use language every day. So on that abstract level, there's nothing radically new there to be essentially frightened about. Okay. Now, to put this in the background or against the background of automation, this is work I've presented elsewhere, so I'll go through it rather quickly. The studies of automation, it's not hard, it's not rocket science. Get a list of professions from 1950, not occupations, okay, jobs basically, and then 1910. In between that, you've got all the computers coming in. How many jobs actually disappeared? Besson found that only one. That job was elevator operator or lift operator, depending on what kind of English you use. Although I have found that there are elevator operators in New York still, and really quite flashy ones in Beijing and Tokyo for the very rich. Okay, so only one occupation. And it was found that automation increases productivity, which is certainly the case in the localization part of translation work. And that can increase the demand for productivity, increases the available work, And so it can not necessarily destroy jobs. It can create jobs, at least in the first instance of its presentation. And so classic studies are from banking. When ATMs came in, your automatic teller machines, that's what where you get your money from a machine, not from a person. You don't go into the bank and get the money. So it was easier to have bank offices. It wasn't so expensive. So what they did then was create more offices, because proximity to the clients brought in more work, which meant that the nature of the bank employee changed, the nature of their work, but not the number of employees. Okay, in the first instance. Then they started moving into selling us fancy financial products that nobody understood, and that led to a 2008 crash. Not directly, but yeah. And these days we find that the banks are closing the offices, and the employment has shifted into all these people who phone us up these days and get the security check, because there are so many hackers coming in. Okay, so and there has been, there are fewer jobs now in banking. That has happened. Eventually, it took a long time, from 1969, but with the various changes, the nature of the occupations, the skill sets have changed quite radically. So it's not a fatality that there is job loss, and in the case of translation, that's not the case. If you get recent statistics from the United States, from Canada, from Germany, where we can find some statistics, they do indicate an expansion in the employment of translators. Not necessarily highly paid work, but there is expansion of work. So what's happening is that we might be doing less than 1% of the translations, right? But as globalization goes ahead and productivity increases, there's more and more communication between languages. That pie gets bigger, so our 1% actually gets bigger. All right. Automation can be enhancing employment, but at the same time changing the nature of the skill set involved. This particular study focuses then on the effect of automation on wage inequality. And this does seem to be something that happens across the board in many occupations. The people who are able to use, own, and develop the technology get richer. And the people who don't, whose job or skill set is replaced by the technology, get relatively poorer or move into less well-paid parts of the labor market. And so wage inequality does seem to be a consequence of automation. And I think we can see that in the translation industry. Some statistics presented from European Union databases will show the tremendous rise in profits from the big translation companies, the ones that have invested in technology and use the technology to get productivity gains, and they keep them for themselves. That's happened at the same time as wages stagnate for certainly freelancers, depending on the sector you're working in, and the wages of the people freelancing for those companies have not gone up spectacularly. So we do have evidence of that bifurcation. So when you're training your students, you might want to think, which part of that labor market are they going to finish up in? The one where there is wage growth, working with and owning technology and developing technology, or the parts of the market where one will hopefully work for art and a bit of money to survive on. This study has come out recently. A study on exposure to automation. So this is old. This has been done before in 2013, 2017. So with machine translation and at the beginning of neural machine translation. translation was calculated as having a certain exposure to automation. Exposure means that your skill set will be affected, will operate. It doesn't mean loss of job. It means change in the nature of what you're doing, okay? But translation and interpreting there was just ranked 265 in 702. So it wasn't the most extreme. It was open to, but nothing to panic about. And then they do mention Fry and Osborne in the 2017 paper. They say that the routine parts of translation, that part that is routine, would be threatened. So that's actually quite a predictive statement there of what was going to happen later. Now, a similar study done very recently, 2023, as you can see there, at a human alpha. Alpha is the share of an occupation's task that is exposed to, that means will be affected by GPTs. Look who comes out on top. Oh, translators and interpreters. It's a long time since we came out on top of anything. But there we are, most at threat. And then we're in the middle here of the beta category, the share of the task that is exposed to software powered by GPT. Okay, so help, we've got to write home, and it's the end of the day. Singularity has reached us, but do take a look, folks. 100% for all these down here. So perhaps these are the people who have to worry more than we have to worry. Now we want to work on that. Now this paper is very clear that exposure means augmenting or labor displacing effects, so not replacement, and that they're working on data from ONET, from the Occupations Net in the United States. That's their database, okay, for doing this. Then they had to go through the database and check whether each particular skill was exposed to automation or not, or something in between, and that's a huge task. Now, I'm just going to show you something about this database. ONET, I've got the 2023 version here. I've gone into translation and interpreting, and it will give you these tasks, which we might recognize as skills or elements of competence profiles, if you like. Okay. And then it's got the importance and whether it's core or peripheral to the task. And these are the things that somebody has to go through and tag and say, yes, automated. Now, what's interesting is Esther Torres and I did this in 2018, checking on exposure to machine translation. And that our work was published in Spanish, okay? And at that stage, we did not see this one at 97. Follow ethical codes that protect the confidentiality of information. 97, up there at the top. Can GPT or any automation technology protect confidentiality of information? No way. Okay. So we could come along and say code human up here for this one. All right. This is where we need humans who can perhaps keep a secret or be sued if they don't keep a secret. Anything electronic can be hacked straight away. Well, we'll get into debates. But anyway, we would not code that as being exposed to automation, but translate messages, yes, although not orally or using hand signs, which is interesting. And listen and process, probably yes. Compile terminology, probably yes, to a certain extent. Now, it's not easy to go through and tag those things, especially if you're doing it for some 987, it's just under 1,000 occupations. We have extensive skill sets of about 40 or so. So it's a huge task. The researchers struggled to do it. They found it difficult. So you know how they did it? They asked GPT to do it for them. I don't know about that massive exposure of translators and interpreters. We want to know how it was done. To give you an idea of how hard it is, we go back to the work we did previously. So for the ethics, we've got, can humans do that? Yes, we hope they can. Can machine translation do it? No. Can GPT do it? No. Reading comprehension? Yes, yes, yes. Writing? Yes, yes, yes. So we just go through and tag things very quickly like that. And that's easy to do for some of them. But I just want to show what happens as we do that analysis. You're asking, where did these things come from? They come from people working in the industry doing the job who fill out a survey. And there are an average of 40 people have been done for over, all these almost 1,000 professions. So the database is certainly not definitive, because those 40 people could be working in one sector and not another. And it's restricted to the United States, where you have a lot of fairly lowly paid work in the courts and in healthcare. And you don't have a government dependence on translation, as happens in Europe or Canada, for example. So just bear this in mind. Just take it as a rough indication of how that exposure was reached. And what's interesting is that as we go and try to do this, we get to points where there's lots of question marks. So just to pick up on one here, it's got critical thinking. It says what they think it is: logic and reasoning, strengths and weaknesses, alternative solutions, etc. Fair enough. I could sort of understand that as critical thinking. And 66, fair weighting. And I think humans can do that. And I think MT can't really do that. It's not what it's trained to do. And now, this is where we get to the problem. Does GPT do that? It can produce a for and against argument very well. It can, if that's your definition, it can do that very well. But it will not reach a conclusion on that basis. Just try it for any of those things. And so we've got this question mark. And what we have to do, if we want to do this seriously, this is going back to the empirical part, we would have to isolate a translation problem that can only be solved using this. And then see, we've humans, we've got, see if machine translation does and see if GPT. I have to have examples, concrete examples of all of these things to be able to test it. I can't just go along and say, yes, 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 no. I need more information. I need more research in order to say what a human can do and what a machine can't do. Okay, and I need examples for specific languages. And then we can get into the arguments of for and against replacement or not. So I think there's a lot to be done just going on, all of these things. I've got these questions. All right. Now, what does that mean when we come to training people to work with these technologies? There is, I think, a false dichotomy. And also we're flying blind. Until we've done that research on those specific skills, we're sort of guessing. It's not good to operate that way, but well, hey, teaching is an experimental, exploratory activity. As I say, there are two approaches. One would be to train students to work with the technology from the beginning, and I do that. We work with machine translation, post-editing at the beginning of the courses I teach. And I have perhaps infamously said that all translating will be post-editing eventually. And I think that's true. But with qualifications. And then Dorothy Kenny has picked me up and opposed and said, no, we should be training students to do what the technology cannot do. So you would pick up those tasks, those high-level, high-tuned, very sensitive, creative uses of language that the machine translation cannot do, and focus on that. So what are we going to do? Teach people to work with the technology or teach them to work beyond the technology? Well, obviously, I think that's a false opposition. I did say prior to that that's what I said. I did say most translators, not everybody. I did also say back in my work on translation history, you know what? Translators do more than translate. That's today and back in history. So I'll get out of that false dichotomy using that trick there. Yeah, don't get stuck into the technology. I think we have to do both. We have to train people to work with the technology to understand what it is, what it can do, what its capacity is, if not understand what's happening inside it, because that is very mysterious to me. Uh, and teach them to do the things that the technology can't do. Obviously, you must do both, I think. How will you do that? First, recognize that they're younger than you are, usually, and that they're better with technology than you are. Because of that, they've grown up with it, and that you're not going to give them a truth that they then apply. What you're going to do is get them to experiment with the technologies in class, both with your help and without you. And then they tell you what they find. And that way we will all discover the limits of the technology and perhaps thereby ways to work with it. What we find in any, I'm not going to say disruptive, but anything new that comes in and creates mass interest and concern, like Pokemon Go, was it? Anyway, or fidget spinners, I don't know. Pokemon, let's stay with that. Okay, people don't know what it is. People and their clients won't know how to work with it, and they're looking for guidance and advice. And they tend to come to people who are in universities who are supposed to know things. Heaven forbid. But anyway, lots of money goes to people who can build up trust. I will show you the correct way to write prompts. I will show you how to use GPT productively in your company. I will train your translators how to integrate GPT into the workflow. And then translators who can use the same thing, saying, look, I'm using this technology to give you an even better product. And it's so much better that you're going to pay me a little bit more. Those skills are interpersonal communication skills, and they are especially spoken skills. Not just spoken translation, but spoken skills in client relations. And those become very important in times of turbulence, which is what we're going through right now. Now, I think one of the worst things that has happened in translator training over the past half century at least is that very deep division between spoken and written, interpreting, especially conference interpreting, and translation looking at a computer. I think these days the kinds of jobs that we're looking for to work with automation means working on the spoken skills, public relations especially, and also working with the technology. Most of our TM, our translation memory suites, allow for dictation, in which you save your wrists and your hands and your back, and you produce a more natural sounding translation by speaking to the computer. I think there's a lot to be done there. The use of prompts is an area in which people are going to get good at, and there will be interest in that as a skill set, as, for example, search engine optimization became a big field. Project management, we have to get our students, that is our translation students, to experiment, to form groups and say, we are little companies producing a text over time. We're going to use the technology and integrate the human element. Where does the human element come in? Okay. It might be, for example, ST comes in, do a linguistic revision of the ST to make it immediately understandable, a kind of automatic pre-editing done with GPT, which is particularly good at this. Okay. Run it through machine translation, adjust the prompt if necessary, see what that gives, and then revise the text, or humanly, or do a human translation, and then get that revised by GPT. And let's see what that gives. Let the students experiment with these different kinds of project management. And it's very obvious, I think, that where the technologies are heading us, or where they're particularly useful, is not so much in the translation process itself. It's not a big advance on neural, as I said, not yet, at least, but it does give us lots of work for editing and revising with the technology, and particularly with attention to specific end users. the more you put in the creative prompt and the technology is creative, the more risks are run, and some human eyes have to come over it just in order to put a stamp of approval at the end. Yes, this is correct. Yes, it's going to work. Especially if it's for high stakes text, as I said. And just in particular, I've been teaching pre-editing, which I think is great fun. Pre-editing just means rewriting the start text so that it goes through machine translation and you avoid the problems. I'm a big fan of pre-editing. I must admit that GPT does that particular one very well. And so I think I will no longer be teaching pre-editing, or I might do it as an intellectual activity. And the last one is that most of the work we do with automation here can be done in a language neutral class. That is a class that has many different languages. In my particular class, we have English as the common language. And then this year, I think there are 7 or 8 different languages being used. It's great fun. People discover what happens in different languages. We find out how those languages work. We're also discovering that the GPT works quite differently with respect to different languages. And once again, that's an exploration process. That's it. I think I want to finish there. I've got some suggestions about what to teach or how to teach it. But the main suggestion is we're at the beginning of this process. It's an exploration, and we can use the space of the classroom to help the students explore along with us.